Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. Unlike the Friday edition, we're dedicating the Tuesday podcast to answering your garden questions. Stay tuned to find out how you can get your garden question into the program. So come on, let's do this. We like to answer your garden questions here on the Garden Basics podcast. A lot of ways you can get your question in. You can go to speakpipe.com and yell at your computer. Go to speakpipe.com/gardenbasics. Talk to that little microphone in your laptop or your smartphone, and your audio question will somehow magically get here. You can use your smartphone as a phone. Wow, what a concept. You can call or text us the question, 916-292-8964, 916-292-8964. Fill out the contact box at gardenbasics.net. You can send an email. Send it to Fred at farmerfred.com. To help us out answer these gardening questions, Debbie Flower is here, America's favorite retired college horticultural professor. Debbie, have you ever moved a fruit tree from one place to another?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. Brought them home, planted them.
And left them.
All
right. Marilyn writes us. She's here in Northern California, and Marilyn says, I have a 1-acre orchard that was planted with a very mixed variety of about 30 fruit and nut trees, planted around 1990.
90, okay.
That's a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. That's 34 years ago.
I was old then, too. All right. From the 12 or so surviving, 2 are citrus, an orange and a grapefruit. 1 is a pear, and all 3 are sweet and high producers. I'm selling the orchard with the right to transplant those 3 trees and move them up to my new home. But all my research indicates the citrus is risky due to age and that they never go completely dormant. But the pear might have a better chance. The buyer plans to cut them down. I did transplant the grapefruit when it was about 7 years old. I didn't have a clue to what I was doing, but it survived. Well, now I'm trying to get estimates, but landscapers and arborists don't seem to do transplants anymore. Only one is coming out soon to take a look. Off the top, would you have any suggestions or ideas? Well, Marilyn, off the top of my head, I'd say you have some pretty old trees there.
Yeah, 34 years for a producing fruit tree is often the limit of its life, especially the deciduous ones. Part of that's based on how they're handled in a commercial orchard, which hers is not.
No.
So that may extend their lives that hers is not.
It'd actually be the other way around. In a commercial orchard, they'll take trees out at 20 years, 25 years old.
Yes, right. And because they've reached the maximum production and they're going down, but also sometimes because they're pruned more severely, they're sometimes shaken, although a pear tree wouldn't be shaken. So yes, they're sometimes beaten up a little bit more, but then they're replaced earlier in their life. But 34 years is an old tree. Old trees can be great, and they're probably so sweet because they've got great root systems and they're establishing really well. Any transplanting is going to limit that root system. There is absolutely no way you can get the entire root system out of the ground with the plant. There are companies that have tree spades. So if you are still looking for somebody to move them, you need a company that has a tree spade. A tree spade is mounted on the back of a pickup truck, a big pickup truck, not your conventional. They're like salad tongs in big metal, and they dig down inside the soil probably 5 feet and come to a point and close down around from either side around the root ball and pull the whole tree, soil, ball, and all out of the ground. They had one come to the UC Davis campus and when I was a graduate student there, and so of course we all had to run over and watch it dig the plant out of the ground. It was a big tree, and that's what they're used for, is big trees, and the trees apparently survive enough that people are willing to do this, but for fruit trees, I'm not sure it's worth it.
Yeah, you see it a lot in landscaping of olive trees.
Olives and palms.
Okay, and palms are fairly easy to transplant.
Yep.
The 2 palms that sit outside left field of Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles were transplanted to that area from Northern California, and they're still alive and well there. But that's a rarity now for a producing fruit tree. No, I think these trees, if you want to save them, Marilyn, I think what you need to do is take some cuttings and do some grafting.
Right. And I don't know, is that legal in citrus? Is it legal to graft?
Is there citrus police around? Or
Well, you can't propagate citrus. unless you're certified to propagate citrus because of the pests in the citrus.
Oh, you're just a spoil sport.
Well, I don't know if anybody's going to catch her doing it, and she's probably, I don't know how far she's moving. If it's within the same township, I would think that it's not a problem. If you're going to have the pest at one of the location in the township, you're going to have the pest at the other one too.
Yeah. Okay, but basically for the citrus, it's to prohibit the transfer of Huang Long Bing citrus greening disease.
Yes.
So yeah, you might have a point there that transplanting a citrus tree from one county to another, especially if you're going from a quarantined county or a quarantined area into a clean county, that might be a problem. So, yeah, judging by the age of these trees, I think I'd start over. Yeah,
I think by moving them, I think the reason they're so sweet and productive is because they are old and stayed in one place. I think if you dig them up and move them, you're going to disrupt all of that, and they're not going to be as productive. You're going to lose large sections of them, and it's going to take them several years to reestablish. You might as well just get a new one.
That's what I tell to people who say, why don't you come on over for the evening? No, I'm not moving.
I'll be sweeter and more productive here.
Yes. Yeah, grafting is the way to go. And if you
for the pear, for sure.
Yeah. And if you're going to be looking for advice on how to graft, the California Rare Fruit Growers does scion exchanges throughout the month of February, usually January, February, March. There are chapters throughout California that put on scion grafting demonstrations during their annual scion exchanges at each chapter. Plus, your local master gardener organization in the county you're going to may have a grafting expert too, or a demonstration garden where you can see grafting demonstrated so you can do it yourself.
Right. It's fun.
It's fun, yeah, and you don't have to go to the expense of trying to move that tree.
Right.
Marilyn, yes, good luck in your new home. Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome, Fred.
We're answering garden questions here on the Garden Basics podcast. Carol writes in and says, I get no real radishes when I plant radishes, just leaves. Help. Well, Carol, let's see what we can do. First of all, radishes make a very good sort of, I'd call it a sentry crop. If you plant them with carrots, the radishes will let you know where the carrots are planted because radishes will pop up very quickly, but carrots can take their sweet time. So that's why a lot of people intersperse carrots and radishes. And Gail Pothauer, master gardener here in Sacramento County, is nodding yes in agreement. So you like to use radishes as that.
Absolutely. Yeah, because carrots can take 3 or 4 weeks to germinate, and the radishes tend to come up very quickly.
Exactly. Now, as far as why your radishes are just producing leaves, oh, man, first thing I would do is get a soil test done.
I agree. If you have too much nitrogen or not enough other nutrients in your soil, that could affect it. If your soil is not very friable, if it's not real crumbly, if it's more hard, if you're gardening in clay, that could have something to do with it. If you have too much nitrogen, you get more foliage than roots development. So it's kind of hard to say, are you mulching? Are you keeping the soil from crusting over, the soil surface from crusting over? Yeah, it's hard to say.
What I don't know is if radishes attract nematodes, and if there is some sort of root-dwelling creature that might be chewing on the roots, keeping that bulb from developing. But Carol doesn't talk about what the leaves look like. Are the leaves healthy looking, or are they yellow leaves? Are they in decline?
I would think that nematodes probably get on everything. So yes, radishes probably have a nematode that gets on them, but typically that's going to affect it in the way it looks like it's not getting nutrients. So it would stop the flow of nutrients up into the leaves. So it would affect the leaves, I would think. They would be yellowed and they wouldn't be getting the nutrients they need. So I think if the leaves look fine and green and lush, it's probably not a nematode issue. Perhaps it is too much nitrogen.
Well, here's a test for you, Carol. Grow radishes side by side. Plant them where you normally plant them, and then have a nearby container with brand new potting soil.
and plant your radishes in that and see if that has the same problem in that container. The container probably should be about 5, 10, 15-gallon container to see if you get radishes or not, and see if there's a difference between what you grow in the container with that packaged soil versus what you're growing in your own soil.
I think that's a good test. As long as it's the same variety that you're growing in both your garden soil and in the container.
Same light, same water.
Yeah, exactly the same. And keep track. Plant them the same day and see what the difference is in the growth and if you get the actual radish to bulb up. And then that could be a good indicator that there's issues with your garden soil.
There you go. Radish test, Carol. Go for it. Thanks for writing in, Gail Pothauer. Go back to cover cropping now.
Okay, thank you, Fred.
The radish experts at Iowa State University's Cooperative Extension offer some more clues about why your radishes may be producing lush foliage, but may not develop good-sized or absolutely no roots. Why is that? They say, like we did, excessive nitrogen, but they also add the rapid onset of hot weather could be the issue, or overcrowding. That could produce plants that are all tops with lush foliage and little or no root development. Diane writes in and asks, I've enjoyed your programs every week now since you started. I mention it often when talking to neighbors, trying to encourage better management, especially with watering, but they won't change their old habits. Welcome to my world, Diane. How would you remove a privet tree from a large 20-inch terracotta clay pot without breaking the pot? I have 2, and the trees are about 20 years old. They're root-bound, and they're failing. I'd like to replace the plants using the same pots, as they are still very nice, but very expensive. Well, in this case, water can be your best friend, Diane. First, reduce the weight of the failing trees by cutting off most of the tops, leaving just enough of the main trunks and maybe a couple of short lengths of 2 side branches to allow you to hold on and gently put that expensive pot down on its side. You might want to cushion the area it will lay on with some fluffy towels, old pillows, or some spongy box insulation. That will break its fall in case you can't gently put the plant on its side. So in that position, use your garden hose with a nozzle on it that's a jet nozzle or a full spray nozzle and start spraying the inside of the container. A forceful spray will loosen the existing soil so that it flows out easily. In time, much of the soil will have been forced out, and you can then just maneuver the cramped root ball around and remove it from the pot. Now, you might have to cut some of the roots if the top of the container is narrower than the base of the container, but at the very least, you'll save the pot and be able to use it for something else. Interestingly, Master Gardener Quentin Young had a similar episode like this way back when. We talked about it in episode 252 in February of 2023. He had a Japanese maple tree that was stuck in a pot, and the roots were clogging the drain holes. It's a rainy season, and it may be raining where you're living right now. And of course, when it rains very heavily, sometimes you notice your trees. And your trees are surrounded by water, puddles of water. Well, that's not very healthy for your trees. Well, let's bring the scope down a little bit and take a look at your potted plants, the plants you grow in containers. Is the water draining through the pot or not? If it isn't, you've got problems. Quentin Young is a Sacramento area garden consultant, landscaper, garden designer, and a pruning specialist. And Quentin posted on his Instagram feed at Q Young Garden a picture of a potted Japanese maple basically swimming in water. The water was not leaving the pot. And Q, I gotta believe when you got there to your client's house that had the Japanese maple in that pot, and you saw that, you went and got your camera and took the picture. So that wasn't a case of, oh, it's been raining and it just happened. That water had probably been there a while.
Yeah, that was from, I think, the storm from New Year's Eve. Yeah. I just got there like a day ago, so I'd probably been there for a week at least, sitting in standing water.
And because Japanese maples are a deciduous tree, they lose their leaves in the wintertime. Sometimes it's hard to tell if it's suffering or not. But I gotta believe that any tree sitting in a large pot where there's floating water in it, it isn't doing the roots any good.
No, it's not doing the roots any good. And you can usually tell once you start trying to pour it out, you get that smell from anaerobic decomposition that smells like stinky eggs. So yeah, it's kind of a two-pronged double strike against it.
So whenever it rains, I mean, the advice we're trying to get across here is check your pots for standing water.
Check your pots, and better yet, maybe, in the fall, add to your maintenance list, turn your pots over, tip them over, look to see if the roots have grown through the holes. Do it beforehand because, like I said, I've been so busy with work. It took me a week to get out there. That's not counting how many pots you might have in your yard and whether you're on vacation, that sort of thing. Be preemptive.
Exactly. So let's talk about some strategies for keeping that water flowing through the pot. Obviously, you want to have drain holes in the bottom of the pot. And I've seen some gardeners who will stick a plant in a pot with no holes, thinking that the water just somehow magically disappears, and it doesn't.
Yeah, and they sort of often will do that. Oh, I'll just keep an eye on it, but you forget. A week later, you've forgotten that pot has no drain holes, and then we have one quick rain, or you have a neighbor that's watering your plants for you, and then unfortunately the symptoms are the same, right? You have this droopy plant, so you think, oh, it needs more water, and you keep watering it until you realize it's drooping because it's sitting in standing water.
And so the first thing you do when you buy a pot to put a plant in, especially a large pot that you're going to be having a tree in, a small tree like a Japanese maple, one of the smaller versions of a Japanese maple, make sure the water can get out of that pot and go somewhere. The other problem people will do is, okay, we'll do that. We'll have a pot with a hole in it. I'll just set it here on the ground and plant it.
This is exactly what happened to my clients is the roots grew through, and these roots were massive. So not only did they fill up the drain hole, but it probably took me a good 45 minutes of moving this pot back and forth just to be able to tip it over to cut the roots off. And I still actually have to go back with a Sawzall. That's how massive these roots were. I couldn't get to the angle with my loppers. They were pretty significant tree roots coming out of the bottom of that pot.
And that pot that you have with that Japanese maple that you posted on Instagram looks like a pretty nice pot, because one strategy...
It's very nice.
Oh, yeah. And they probably were not willing to maybe have you drill a small hole towards the bottom on the back side to allow some drainage.
Actually, I hadn't probably thought about that. If I'd had a drill with a proper porcelain bit, that could have been plan B. But the drainage hole was pretty big to begin with. It was about the size of maybe a mandarin when I planted that tree. That was probably 4 or 5 years ago. But that hole was one solid root. So that took me a while, just like I said, to be able to get that pot at an angle to be able to cut that root was a bit of a nightmare. But I did it. But like I said, I still got to go back with the Sawzall. I want to cut more of the root out, and then I want to try to drill some of the root out that's coming through that hole. But all of that could have been prevented if I had just been a little bit more preemptive about it.
If it wasn't an expensive pot, one easy way of getting it out would be just to break the pot.
I've done that in the past.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've all done that. And actually now, the dormant season, winter, it's a good season for repotting waterlogged deciduous trees.
Yeah, doing a little bit of root pruning, putting them back in with some fresh potting soil. And if you're lucky, maybe your local garden center is having a sale on pottery because it's winter.
Would you move up a size in pots to do that?
I would, yeah. I would try to, but in the past, like with my citrus trees, I just recan them back into the same size pot, but I do some root pruning. And like you said, now's a good time in the dormant season. With my citrus trees, I just want to make sure that I picked all the fruit off. But now would be a good time. You could sort of, with the Japanese maple, treat it a bit like a bonsai and just do some root pruning and put it back in the same size. But you could go up a size if you wanted.
Would you wash off the soil and then repot it into new soil?
I would wash off part of the old soil as part of the root pruning and definitely put it in with some new fresh potting soil.
And I bet there'd be something under the pot this time around.
Yeah, so this is a good example of just how time changes things. I had it on some pieces of brick and things like that, same way that we do with the wine barrels at the horticulture center. But over time, things sink and they settle, and this had settled into the ground. And that's what allowed the roots to grow through the hole into the ground.
This is a good lesson for anybody with potted plants. Don't set them on the soil because the roots will find the soil below.
Yeah. And if you do put them on the soil, go back maybe once a year, tip it over, make sure that it hasn't sunken into the ground. Because I had some pots at home that had done the same thing. They had just settled into the ground and started to root into the ground. And so luckily I caught those in time.
Another strategy would be to put something like a plastic plant stand beneath it that just raises it maybe an inch or so above the soil line.
Yep, or use some pieces of broken brick. I have some bamboo in pots at home, and what I did, just to be extra safe, I used 12 by 12 and 24 by 24, just regular concrete pavers that you would use to make a path. And I put them on those. So that way I know for sure that there's no way that they're going to root into the ground.
You're a gambling man.
I know, because it's bamboo.
Yeah. But what the heck? You got to do something. Yeah, raise it off the ground so that there is that air gap here that will discourage any roots from leaving the pot and getting into the soil. You mentioned, though, that in your Instagram post that if this is a big pot and for one person to handle it, to tip it over, to take a look, it took a bit of effort.
It did. It took me almost 45 minutes of rocking back and forth, of cutting fairly significant roots to be able to turn the pot over on its side to get to that major root ball, which I still have to go back and cut out. But that explains why my client had me do it, and they didn't.
Yeah. But this is a good time of the year to do it, the dormant season, because it's not pushing out new growth at this time. The days are too short. The soil is too cool. And this would be a good time for doing that repotting, root pruning, and making sure that your tree hasn't anchored itself in your garden bed.
Exactly. Lesson learned.
All right. Yes, indeed. So go ahead and check your pots. By the way, and this brings up a very good point, too, is anytime you are watering those containerized plants, make sure that the water is leaving the bottom. Water it by hand with a hose. Stand there and wait until the water leaves the bottom of the pot.
That is true. And like I said, if you have a plant that looks droopy, double check. Make sure that it's droopy because, let's say in the summertime, make sure that it's droopy because it hasn't gotten enough water and it's not instead sitting in standing water.
Yeah, which is often the problem, too. That's why moisture meters with a good long prong on it, 12 inches or even 24 inches, can give you a good idea of what's happening at the bottom of the pot. And usually, like you say, it's a stinky thing.
Yeah, and like I said, that's also a good rule of thumb for houseplants, too. Because people will often overwater houseplants, not realize they're sitting in standing water, and they'll have them start drooping through lack of oxygen, and they'll just keep overwatering them. Same sort of rule of thumb. Get your moisture meter, lift your plant up, check the weight, number of different things to make sure that you're not overwatering those too.
Yeah, now, unless you're Arnold Schwarzenegger, you're not going to be lifting a potted tree up to figure if it's wet or dry.
That is correct.
All right, water, it can be your friend, it can be your enemy, and this is the time of year for your potted outdoor plants. Make sure that there is drainage going on. Quentin Young, again, he's on Instagram at QYoungGarden. Sacramento County Master Gardener. He works in the orchard at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center, and they always have a great display of fruit trees, deciduous fruit trees, and citrus trees that you can check out and see how they could work in your landscape. The best event at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center is always the first Saturday in August, Harvest Day. If you're in Northern California, on the first Saturday in August, you need to check out Harvest Day at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. Quentin Young, thanks so much for keeping us high and dry.
Thanks for having me on, Fred.
Want to leave us a garden question? You'll find a link at gardenbasics.net. Also, when you click on any episode at gardenbasics.net, you're going to find a link to SpeakPipe. You'll find it in the show notes. And when you bring up SpeakPipe on your computer or smartphone, you can leave us an audio question without making a phone call. Or you can go to SpeakPipe directly. That's speakpipe.com/gardenbasics. You want to call or text us? We have that number posted at gardenbasics.net. It's 916-292-8964, 916-292-8964. Email? Sure, we like email. Send it along with your pictures to fred@farmerfred.com. Or again, go to gardenbasics.net and get that link. And if you send us a question, be sure to tell us where you're gardening, because all gardening is local. Find it all at gardenbasics.net. Garden Basics with Farmer Fred comes out every Tuesday and Friday, and it's brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Garden Basics, it's available wherever podcasts are handed out. For more information about the podcast, visit our website, gardenbasics.net, and that's where you can find out about the free Garden Basics newsletter, Beyond the Basics. And thank you so much for listening.